Hello and welcome back to the UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Ferguson, writer for UCLA on SI. Today we're going to be breaking down UCLA's recent transfer portal moves and kind of what this means for UCLA's strategy moving forward for the rest of the transfer portal and the offseason. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone right now who's listening, Apple Music, Spotify, or even YouTube. It all means a lot to me and I cannot thank you enough. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So, UCLA has kind of started this transfer portal hot. We didn't really hear much, from the last 2 days, but now UCLA has two really good players on their side. And while they're not necessarily stars, they are definitely players who help, fix some of UCLA's problems. You got to remember, UCLA 411th in rebounding last season. Their team was, I believe, the worst defensive team under Mick Cronin during his time at UCLA. So obviously UCLA was, fighting those problems head on. It definitely feels less like they're trying to attack, the departures head on. I'm talking about, Donovan Dent, Bilodeau, Sky Clark, Christian Horry. Those departures, well, yes, they hurt, and UCLA does need to address them somehow. I think, that's not necessarily the strategy already. I think it's more of, getting this team to where, the defense and, rebounding looks a lot better on paper. And that could ultimately be the key for UCLA to make a lot of noise. I mean, we've talked about the offensive talent UCLA has now, time and time again. I'm talking about, Eric Daly Jr., Trent Perry, Eric Freeney, players like that who are going to make an impact next season offensively, right? But now that UCLA has brought in, these two players, the first one being Sergej Macura. Sorry if I mispronounced that name, but he is a sophomore. He is 6'9". Last season with the Mississippi State Bulldogs, he averaged 5 points, 4.8 rebounds, while shooting 55.7% from the field. He also averaged 18.5 minutes. So again, he was a consistent contributor to the Mississippi Bulldogs. Obviously they didn't have the best season overall. 13 and 19. I mean, to be that impactful in the SEC, it definitely shows something for UCLA. And it's honestly going to be exciting to see if he's able to develop into a good player. I think he will. I mean, he has all the tools, the physicals to really be a good player for the Bruins next season. He had multiple 10 plus rebound games. So again, he definitely fills that rebounding hole well for UCLA. And I am really excited about, Macura becoming a UCLA Bruin here. The other player that UCLA was able to get was Filip Jovic. Again, sorry if I mispronounced that name. These international names are definitely difficult, but he is a freshman. So again, high ceiling. I love that pick. And again, this kind of reemphasizes what I said in the beginning. UCLA could, get players, already who are going to fill in the holes that, Donovan Dent, Tyler Bilodeau left. But it looks like they're going to be playing the long game, by getting the players who are younger, who have the skills, to really grow on. We obviously know Filip Jovic, 6.3 points per game, 4 rebounds per game while shooting 64% from the field. As a freshman in the SEC, I think that is definitely promising. Auburn, was a very strong team towards the end of the season. Obviously, there's a lot of that stuff with them missing the tournament outright. But either way, I think Jovic is definitely a great pick up for the Bruins. I honestly, have no issues with this. But like I said, it's just a matter of kind of looking at what UCLA has decided to do, in this transfer portal. Many people thought it was going to be filling in the departures. But it really does look like UCLA is starting to fill in those fundamental spots that will make the Bruins a much better team, long term. So we're talking about Jovic, a freshman. He's going to have 3 years of eligibility left when he's with the Bruins, and Sergej Macura, obviously a sophomore. So he's going to be a junior next season. He's going to have, his junior season and senior season with the Bruins if he decides to stay. And I do think UCLA is going to be more aggressive in the portal now because obviously getting those players, it's going to free up a lot of things for UCLA, lineup wise. I think it's important to remember that UCLA has 15, scholarship spots open. And right now they have, I believe 9 scholarship slots open. We're talking Trent Perry, Eric Daly Jr., Xavier Booker, Brandon Williams, Eric Freeney, Javonte Floyd, Joe Philon, players like that who are going to take up those scholarships. But now UCLA definitely has, is starting to fill up those slots. It's expected that UCLA will kind of go into the next season with, around 13 of those scholarship slots filled. And it's also important to remember how, expensive players are. especially in the transfer portal. I mean, we're talking $4 to $5 million, for American players. There's definitely a price difference, in my opinion, when you kind of evaluate talent across the board from, different countries, stuff like that. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. UCLA would like a little bit more money, obviously, but again, we're not too sure what their salary cap is. But again, you got to remember Trent Perry, Eric Daly Jr., Xavier Booker, Brandon Williams, Eric Freeney. They're definitely going to cost you a pretty penny for sure. And again, that might restrict how well UCLA is able to kind of, operate in this transfer portal. Obviously, I've kind of talked about some other players who I think would be a good fit for UCLA. But, after looking at these two picks, it's definitely going to be harder for UCLA to kind of get those players. For example, John Blackwell, #1 overall, transfer in this year's transfer portal. He has been kind of linked to UCLA. Obviously not, he hasn't been in the building. I think he was at a Clippers game when UCLA basketball was in town, for their like championship parade or whatever. So again, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Do I think UCLA can afford him? I hope so. You got to remember, UCLA is definitely going to have to, allocate this money somehow. And I think they do have a lot of, roster spots to kind of fill still. But now I'm going to kind of break down what exactly I expect Macura and, Jovic to kind of play next season for the Bruins. And do I think they will be starters? I don't know. You got to remember UCLA's strongest position as of now is probably their forward room when you kind of look at everything that's going on. Obviously, Eric Daly Jr., Xavier Booker, they're going to fill in those, small forward, power forward, right? Maybe Booker will have to move to center, because, he is 6'10", tallest player on the team, obviously. And obviously Macura and Jovic are proven at that power forward position. And that's going to definitely, influence how much UCLA will have, flexibility. I remember also Brandon Williams is a forward to keep an eye on. I think he's improved well. I think his physicality is what has kind of set him above the rest of UCLA's players this season. Obviously not the most explosive stat line per se, but he definitely has, the intangibles needed to help UCLA become a better team overall. And I think Macura and obviously Jovic are going to complement that well too. I think if you have players who can kind of come in, play that 5 role, I could see Macura, obviously 6'9", kind of slide in there. Same thing with Jovic, 6'8". I think each player could probably slide into that 5 role and have Booker, at power forward. But again, do I think they'll be starters? I think maybe. I think the most likely pick for that would be probably Jovic. Obviously Macura is good, 4.8 rebounds. Starting minutes, I definitely could see him obviously be a starter for UCLA. But as of now, I really do project that they will be, kind of those role players, but they will be playing heavy minutes. And obviously that does hinge on how well they do improve throughout the offseason and, throughout the regular season. Because, remember we saw Trent Perry. He started out on the bench, and by the end of the season, he was UCLA's 3rd leading scorer. I think in the case of these two players, I think something similar like that could happen where, they start the season off slow, but eventually, Mick Cronin sees, the effort, the physicality, and he's going to want them playing, extended minutes. We're talking 25 plus minutes per game. I think that is definitely a realistic scenario. But yeah, they definitely have a skill set that definitely makes the UCLA a better team. Because like I said, again, I'm going to keep reemphasizing this. It does look like UCLA is going to be kind of fixing the team's fundamentals first. That defense, that rebounding, the aggressiveness in the paint in general, before they kind of start to address, those heavy hitters. I think they're really just trying to build up this team from, the floor up. You got to remember, Trent Perry is going to be a junior, so he's going to have 2 more years, and he's going to be able to play alongside Jovic and Macura. So again, I think UCLA is kind of starting to open up their window wider instead of, narrowing it down to, next season to where they can actually make a deep push. Do these moves get me excited for next season? A little bit. I think UCLA is definitely going to, improve on all levels, offensively as well. They've both proven to be decent in the paint, especially when you take in Xavier Booker, Eric Daly Jr. I think it's going to be a very interesting combination of the 4 players, 3 players probably at the court together at the same time. But yeah, I think I'm definitely excited. Now, am I So in a scenario where UCLA gets, one of these 5-star prospects, a John Blackwell, Jackson Shellstad, even though I think he went to Louisville, but a player who's a 5-star guard, would I be more excited? 100%. I think, what UCLA wants right now is definitely, a star, a guy who is going to elevate UCLA just by his presence on the court. I definitely think UCLA has, opportunities to kind of go out there and get that before the transfer portal fully closed. I believe it closes on the 21st. So again, plenty of time for UCLA to kind of build up, these players in the transfer portal. So again, I think this is just a sneak peek of what UCLA is getting. I think they just wanted to, secure the fundamentals right now before they move on to, being more aggressive with, the star players. Because right now, I really don't think UCLA is in the running for many of these better players. Because again, UCLA is, towards the top of the totem pole of the Big Ten. And, in college basketball in general, players are going to, be flooding to, the UConns, the Michigans, teams like that who are proven winners and could, ultimately benefit more if they get, a 5-star player like Blackwell, for example. So again, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how UCLA, wraps up this portal. I think the next move UCLA will make is going to have to be a guard, because again, guards are going to be, they're a hot commodity. Obviously, the more expensive options in the portal, and you got to remember, UCLA did not even get a guard in, this year's recruiting class. Joe Philon, Javonte Floyd, those are both forwards. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how, you got to remember the newcomers, Jovic, Macura, Philon, Floyd, how that is going to kind of mix. And obviously Eric Daly Jr., Xavier Booker. UCLA is loaded with, height and physicality. This is a sharp contrast from last year, because you got to remember UCLA's guard room. We're talking Sky Clark, Donovan Dent, Trent Perry, Jamar Brown. Those were, the top 4 guards who were kind of flipping in and out. And when you look at the forwards, Brandon Williams, Xavier Booker, Eric Daly Jr., Tyler Bilodeau. Not much flexibility there. So I definitely see UCLA is kind of evolving its identity through, just the beginning of this portal. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see. Again, I keep reemphasizing what UCLA does next, but I think it has to be a guard. That is definitely something that UCLA is thin at. Trent Perry and Eric Freeney right now are the only real players there. Jack Settler. But I don't really know how much impact he's going to have next season. You got to remember, he was the guy who would come in when UCLA was up 20 points. So again, very convincing, day for UCLA basketball. I like where they're going. But yeah, definitely stay tuned for more updates on the transfer portal. There's obviously going to be a lot more coming in, I hope, because if UCLA walks out of the portal with just these 2 players, I will think UCLA walked out of this transfer portal as the losers in the Big Ten. And that is not a slight to Macura or Jovic, but again, the portal has so much talent this year, and UCLA needs to figure out how to capitalize on that. But that's all I really have for today's episode. I appreciate you guys making it this far. If you are still listening, it definitely means a lot to me. But as always, fours up and have a good day.